Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Cherry Jacobs Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. And now on to today's POP podcast episode.
Welcome, Jim. On behalf of Riane Eisler and the entire Center for Partnership Systems team, I want to welcome you and thank you for being on the Power of Partnership podcast.
Well, super to be here. It's really an honor, and I'm excited. Looking forward to it.
Me too. So, Jim, you are a filmmaker, an author, and educator that moved from military engineering to pioneering in simplicity. Your film, Saving Walden's World, has screened in over 70 communities on 4 continents and has won 13 International Film Festival awards. So your story really begins with you awakening from the false domination-based narrative around the inevitability of war and the justification of destruction. So can you share more with our audience now about this awakening and how it has helped shape who you are today?
Yeah, I was a young engineer out of college, and I got a job out in California for a big offense contractor. I thought at the time it was a defense, but from being inside, I found out the opposite. But it took a while to awaken because I was a young Republican kid. And I believed in that whole thing. If you take away people's guns, only the bad people have guns. At the time when I was a young engineer, I was not paying attention to politics. So I get this job, and on the first day, people are protesting because Vandenberg Air Force Base was blowing up these Marshall Atolls and had blown up multiple nuclear weapons, like even a weapon 1,000 times the size of the weapon at Hiroshima, just to do target practice. And they relocated the indigenous people. So there's this huge protest. And I was oblivious to all that, but I finally slowly woke up. And in '87, I found myself in the middle of the Iran-Contra scandal, and the device I was lead engineer for was called the KL-43, was being used by Oliver North to undo the Nicaraguan revolution. And I was having arguments with the people in my community thinking I was right, that, oh, they're bad guys and they're communists. But then I started listening more deeply, and they're telling me they're coming back from Nicaragua with torture manuals. And I started having this slow wake-up call that the U.S. was actually engaged in what they called at the time low-intensity warfare, which is really going into poor countries and wreaking bloody havoc and just murdering people in horrible ways to shock the culture out of wanting to be socialist. And that's like when I realized it was land reform, literacy, healthcare, all the things we were forcing them to give up, all their social programs to be favorable to U.S. business interests. I had no idea that's what it was all about. That the U.S. was doing this huge geopolitical warfare around the entire planet with 50 covert operations going on, and they're all meant to destabilize countries to support whatever faction is favorable to U.S. business interests. And that violated every ethical bone, even in my right-wing body. And so when I went to the boss, I went to the president, and I said, wait, how can you ask me to sell it? And he said, it's not for you to decide, it's for the State Department. I said, no, it's for me because I'm the lead engineer. I have 20 people working for me making this device, and we're going to sell it and hurt people. And I realized I cannot be on the side of hurting people so we could get richer. Like that really bugged me. We're already the richest country and we're using our military might, the most powerful country on earth by 10 factor to get more. That's sick.
So then, how did your journey unfold? How did you get yourself out of that situation and into the world that you're in now, where you're making amazing documentary films about sustainability
Mm-hmm.
and how we can really shift away from war based on profit and into a world that's based on caring?
Yeah, well, I had a crisis moment and I couldn't go to work one more day, like a spiritual emergency. You know, you just are frozen and you have to go to work and you can't. And I realized I had to change. So I asked myself at 1989, how much do I need? And I locked myself in my house for the weekend. And I realized if I took the car off the road, rented 3 out of the 4 bedrooms in my house, and planted a vegetable garden, that I could live the rest of my life on what I had earned by the age of 30. And so that's been my 34-year experiment. Now I still have the original capital that I had when I quit, and I've been living off the interest income of that money, and then doing full-time volunteer work and peace work. And what was interesting, when I first quit, I didn't know what I was going to do next in 1989. And I started going to the cafe like every day, and I just sit in a cafe. It's like a hippie cafe in San Luis Obispo, California, Linnea's Cafe. And all the artists of the community go there. And I just sat in the back garden reading books. And that's when I came across Riane's book, Chalice and the Blade, and started understanding, wow, I was part of this dominator society, men dominating women, people dominating nature, the rich dominating the poor, and all those powerful dominators. And I was a part of it. And I didn't want to be a part of that anymore, like really. And so that gave me this construction, like something to shoot for, which was to me super exciting because when you're part of partnership society, you feel better all day long. But when you're part of cheating people for greed and for profit and for power, you kind of feel horrible all day long. And on your deathbed, you're going to look back and say, that was a horrible way to spend a life, cheating others out of their money, hurting poor people in other countries, versus like making the world more wonderful for everyone, for the people you don't know. I love what Bernie Sanders says. Think about the person you don't know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's basic neurochemistry. I mean, that's how we're biologically wired, is to feel better when we're caring and nurturing each other, and not feeling well when we're causing each other pain and living in fear. So, can you talk about your journey then from exiting this world in offense instead of defense, and how that led to you writing a book? What were you hoping to communicate with that book, and then becoming a documentary film writer?
Sure. When I quit, all of a sudden I found myself with the energy of working like an 80-hour day. When I was an engineer, I would work long days. I had 110 hours one week.
Mm.
And I was alive as a young engineer building this crazy thing. But I put all that energy into activism as a volunteer. And so I did it everything. I went to Washington, D.C. with a tie and lobbied Congress. I stood on blockades, like doing like Earth First, defending the Earth, stopping wars, like blockading military bases. I got onto the board of like 3 organizations, becoming a board member of an environmental group, peace group. I got elected at the Sierra Club, and I just was doing like full-time activism for free. So I worked all my work for the last 34 years have been for free. Like I don't need a paycheck. I just want to do work I believe in. So all this work I was doing, then I decided to write a book about that because I thought too many people do their activism in the evening, mostly because they're trying to keep the American dream alive. They have to work so hard to pay all their bills, and they figure they're going to work from 9 to 5 till they're 65, retire, and then have time. Well, I figured out a way to retire at 30. And if I knew this information when I was 18, I could have worked till I was 27. I wouldn't have had to work all the way to 30 to retire the rest of my life. And so this to me, I felt like this was when you can do this culture jam where you can do something that jams culture. Like, okay, if thousands and thousands of people simplify their life, get their spending way down, get their earning way up, then you save that money and invest it in something that's ethical but generating interest. Then at some point, your monthly spending is equal to your interest income. That happened for me at 30 years old, free and clear the rest of my life with the financial plan that's worked. And I still have my capital that I started with. And now I've been able to be 35-year full-time for what I believe in. And that always came to me to be women's rights, the environment, wilderness, indigenous rights. I've done a ton of work for indigenous peoples and for poor people. You know, I'm a middle class white guy. I already have everything I need. Even on 5,000 a year, that's what I chose to live on. I have my needs met. What about someone who is a single mom with 3 jobs? I want the society to work for her. Or an immigrant who came here and they're undocumented, they're still a person. There's no label. I want them to have a good life. They're working hard. They outwork. If you go to the blueberry barrens here where we live in Maine, they're all people from Latin America and they work harder than anybody up here. You know, if I tried to pick against apples against a Latin American person, they'll pick 4 apples for my one. And I'm a hard worker. They just work so hard and we want to disparage them. And it just gets me upset because they can outwork almost anybody I know. And I'm a hard worker. And so like, that's what I started doing is like sticking up for those getting, discriminated against in society and around the world.
So that feels like a good segue into your film, Saving Walden's World. Tell us about how this existential transformation led you into becoming a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah, well, I was hoping it would be able to help Bernie get elected, the progressive, because those values of universal higher education, healthcare, dentistry, maternity leave, childcare, all those things. When I wrote my book, Radical Simplicity, I have a whole chapter flushing that out. And it all came down to this factor of women empowerment and powerful women. And so then I thought, let me make a film about chapter 11 of my book. And that's what was the original idea. And that is called the 100-Year Plan to Sustainability. And what it shows is that wherever people are having small families, it's always because women have had universal higher education and opportunity. And so once women have that, they don't want to be a baby factory. They still want to be a beautiful mom, 1 or 2 kids. But there's 120 nations having below replacement fertility. And it's wherever women are getting a good life and not being in the kitchen and the bedroom, taking care of the old people, the young people, the children, her husband. As soon as a woman is broken from that and has careers and things she wants to do good in the world, you know, she's on fire, still be a great mom. But so that's where I went. So I looked at the data sheets and found these societies. So I picked 3 societies that are really exemplary. They're off the charts in accomplishment, like lower infant mortalities in the US. So Kerala, India, Cuba, and Slovenia are like the most sustainable places on earth because they have gotten the most life quality from the smallest amount of resource of anybody we know on earth. And he did it through partnership.
Right. Can you share some examples of what that looks like in each of these countries that you chose as examples?
Yeah, it's just beautiful. Like in Kerala, India, they have 4 million women part of this thing called Kudumbashree, which is like Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank. It's making microloans to women, but women actually do peer lending in Kerala. So 4 million women out of a society of 30 million, they meet weekly and they put money in their own bank account, but they also listen to each other's stories each week. And then after about 6 months of this, they have a pool of money developed and they'll make a small loan to whichever woman they think really needs it the most. They'll make the loan first, and then she'll get a loan. And then the government will match that loan with a grant. When she pays it back, she gets a full amount of that rich. She borrows like $1,000. She pays it back, and they always pay the money back to their friends. It's peer lending. But then The government gives her another 1,000. That's a gift. So you have all these small businesses spawning by women. And what's magical about it, it's economic empowerment. So she's not under the thumb of her husband anymore, which is transformative in a lot of societies. It would be even in our own society, transformative. Because now the husbands in some of these, even in Kerala, were very abusive, alcohol. If you give money to the men there, they're going to buy themselves a scooter and in alcohol and sit on the corner in the evening drinking with their buddies. Women don't do that. By and large in these societies, when they make these loans, women are going to get another cow and milk it and sell milk to the local tea shops and make a living, or they're going to start an organic farm. And Kerala, all the businesses are organic, local. So the shirt I'm wearing, for example, is hand stitched from khadi, which is a hand woven material. And I had it made while I was in Kerala. I was there in 93 and I had a shirt made. I went back 30 years later, the same guy is still there making shirts. Like, what country can you go to where there's stability for that long and someone is still employed and his kids are getting master's degrees? It's like mind changing.
So, this example that you're talking about really hits on several different gender stereotypes, which, as our listeners hopefully know from listening to other podcast episodes, are gender is one of the four cornerstones that Riane Eisler really talks about as being a key lever to make changes across societies away from domination and into partnership. But I'm wondering if you're seeing any of those gender stereotypes start to transition into men taking on more of those caregiving roles that women may have been more traditionally, as you were talking about earlier, taking care of children, taking care of the sick or the elderly. In your explorations during the filming, are you seeing any of those shifts for the masculinity gender stereotypes?
Yeah, well, in Kerala, it's beautiful. This one woman, she's an organic farmer, and her husband and her do all the work together. And she says, Sashi, her husband, he helps me with cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children, everything. And then they do the farm work together. And it's so beautiful to watch that. And he almost was in tears when I asked him what it felt like. And he says, it's such a beautiful change, to have a partner. And it just, like, for men, I think they're blowing it when they think they want to be the rooster, and not embody the partnership, because they lose so much being fearful or trying to be domineering. And it's like taking the low road instead of the high road. In Cuba, too, is really neat because Cuba is this macho kind of culture,
Yes.
just like a lot of Latin American places. But even in Cuba, you would see, like, the guys are all talking about women empowerment, but the women are still doing a lot of cooking. When we're there filming and you watch what's happening, because in Cuba, they're going to take really good care of you if you're guests, right? So you're there with the film team. The women go straight to work cooking. So they're going to have a big feast for you for lunch, even if you're just a film team. And the men are talking about all the things, But in society there, when you get married, the men have to sign a paper that says they're going to help with the housework. So we talked to this medical doctor and said, is there any women getting abused in your village? She says, yeah, we do have it. I said, do you ever see women coming in bruised or battered? She says, I'd never seen that. And I said, well, what do you mean? What kind of violence do you see? She said, some men won't help with the housework. That's what she called violence. Domestic violence, abuse, was men not helping. No, but even, like, during Castro's regime, he was really trying to lift women up. Gender parity was really happening. And they got the right for, like, one of my characters says, the feminists in Cuba of the 30s won our right to abortion, to legal abortion. Women's rights were determined in the 30s. She says, we haven't been fighting for that for 80 years. The feminists of Latin America and Cuba, they already won that battle in 1930.
You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We hope you are enjoying today's episode and you will consider joining our family of sponsors. Or you can help us attract sponsors by downloading, following, or subscribing to the series, and liking and rating each episode you view on YouTube. We also would love to hear from you, including if you have a partnership story that you would like to share. Reach out to us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode. So how about any examples from the third country that you explore through your documentary, Saving Walden's World?
Yeah, Slovenia is a really neat place because there, every society has had this more or less wave of, if you go back far enough, it was matriarchal, matrilineal, and then things moved into a male domination, and then they're kind of fighting back now. So Slovenia had that, but under Yugoslavia, the women had broad uh, rights and equality in the workplace, and equal pay, gender equality, and their infant mortality rate is half of that of the US. With half the GDP, they have half the children dying. They have a lower abortion rate than US, but abortion is not stigmatized and fully legal, paid for, and it's a woman's choice to have it. They don't put all these crazy restrictions like, oh, so many weeks. They want to make sure a woman is ready to birth a child and that she really wants it. It wasn't forced on her by an irresponsible male. So they say, any abortion is caused by an irresponsible male. So it's more the man's problem, not the woman's problem. If she gets impregnated when she doesn't want to be pregnant, there's only one way that can happen, from an irresponsible male who hadn't listened to his partner, didn't take no for an answer, and didn't respect that she was not ready to be a mom, and didn't use birth control. That's his job.
Beautiful.
Two. Yeah.
So much of what you're talking about, we're obviously based here in the United States, and so much of the battles, the challenges, the wins, the losses, have taken somewhat for granted in the United States for women, and we're recording this now in 2025. I believe it's 80 some days into the second Trump administration. And so I think, Americans, and I think it's impacting others around the world as well, are really needing to wake up to not taking these basic rights and ways of approaching gender issues for granted. What are your thoughts about where we're at today? And I know that's a big, big question, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's a really scary time. And, our son cried the moment Trump got elected, because, a lot of their friends are, gender nonconforming, and a lot of the kids in the schools are, the more sensitive kids, the kids who aren't like the jocks, they're the ones who become the targets, of bullying. And when this kind of, it feels like Trump has this way of accentuating the bad in us, the dominator in us, celebrating domination over others, and really like squelching our all the progress we've made toward being kind to one another. So it's making amplifying the worst and stifling the best. And so right now, I feel like we really have to work extra hard. And the thing is, like, say I don't like doing dishes, but my 15-year-old, if I just walk around saying I don't like doing dishes, like I don't like doing politics, but you better, who's the adult in the room here? If you don't like politics, and you want your kids to have a future, I don't see the two happening unless you get active. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? That's the question. It's like, I don't like to ask, like, what are you going to do? It's more like, what am I going to do now? Because we really are being called like we've never been called before, just even for basic democracy, for human rights, for women's rights, for everything, and ecological things. And I never thought it could get as bad as it is right now in 2025 under Trump. I never thought he could try to roll back all this progress. And it's a time that's critical because this is, we're reaching all these global tipping points. And we're at a point where the kindness that we had been kind of developing, where all these societies were having smaller families, people coming out of poverty, that's all going to go backward. And, there's global gag rules where if any country even allows abortion, we're not going to offer any funding. So it has these global implications and implications for the poor in our country. They're the ones who they're trying to force into birth, making these really restrictive abortion laws in the poorest states where they have the highest infant mortality. Like some of our poor states are like what you would call a very poor society, having really poor outcomes in longevity and infant mortality rates and health and literacy. And that's where they're pushing this. And, they're trying to make America white again. And it's a sad thing. It's a very racist, white supremacist impulse. And they want to birth more because that's who's going to buy stuff. If you want a growth economy, you need consumers who want to buy stuff, and you need more people because more people is going to accelerate.
Nice. Yeah, and that brings up a point that I'd love for you to talk just a little bit about. You talk about your film being an olive branch to red states and the blue state divide. So, can you talk just a little bit more specifically about what you mean by that?
Yeah, this red state, blue state divide, because I grew up in a really conservative family. I mean, both mom and dad were like right of Rush Limbaugh, crazy conservative. But I knew who they were as a person. So they were frugal. Like my mom would stitch the, patches on my dad's knees of his trousers. They would pick up garbage, a mile up and down the street from their own house. She would grow all these extra vegetables, put them out on the front porch for free. And if a rich person would come and pick them up, she would kind of pull them back and know who in the community was not so wealthy. And she would somehow make some funny way of getting them to that person without that person feeling like they were being given a handout. And they always believed in this like pull yourself up by the bootstraps thing. But then my baby brother was gay and they had to face that and they chose to love him. And so that gave me this deep respect for conservatives. And so my parents would make America great again is to make people kinder, more generous, more accepting of those different than them, more accepting of other societies and cultures and everything Trump wants to cancel, this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. My parents were all for that stuff. That's what made them conservative, was really loving others who are different than themselves. Like my dad was a laborer, so he would work on a whole chain of wheelbarrows. Like you're talking 100 wheelbarrows in a row in New York City, and everybody's mixing and they're all either Eastern European, the most discriminated, or Black or Latino. And he worked with people, all the workers of all these different races and nationalities, and he knew how hard they worked. Like my dad was a bulldog. He could work and work and work, man. That guy's never going to topple a wheelbarrow, strong and muscular and like 5'8". And but what make America great is you're like really helping your neighbor, really caring for those who are getting picked on. Like you're strong, so if somebody's picking on somebody, you're going to defend them. If someone bullying the school starts picking on some kid, you're going to go and defend him. You're never going to stick up for the bully. That's not the right wing that I grew up with. And that's why my film, I think, resonates. My book resonated with people across the aisle, and I think my film will too. Like, so the heroes of my film are the women that I'm filming in these three societies who have had the benefit of 3 generations of higher education. It's been universal for 60 years in those 3 societies. So now you have a grandmother, a mom, and now the daughter, all with higher education.
Fair to
Oh,
say.
it's Oh, it's amazing because they really promote in, say, Kerala, for example, 50, they put a 30% reserve um, for women in 20 it was 1998, but then in 2010 they put a 50% reserve of all the seats in local governments for women. So now you have 58% of women in positions of power in the communities. And you see that's partnership because now it's what all these societies are doing is leveling the playing field. And it's not really boosting women above men, it's just making it even. So, classism is a huge thing. In Kerala, they call it caste. In our society, it's class.
Mm.
The janitor makes maybe 1,000 times less than the CEO. That's radical inequity. And when you have that radical inequity, you have a horrible situation in society. You have rich and poor, and the rich get richer because they know how to manipulate the whole structure of society. So these societies made a conscious decision to level the playing field and that makes partnership possible. So I wanted to film where it's beautiful. And that to inspire the men mostly. Like my film is really for men in a way, for us to see like how beautiful it is to be in partnership and not to be the oppressor, not to be the dominator. Because loving the earth is really beautiful. Like when you fall in love with the earth, it's a beautiful day and you feel so good. When you really fall in love with people who are different than you learn all these things that you wouldn't know otherwise. So in my book, I have this idea of interhuman equity. So I want to be fair among all humans. And then I have species equity. So I want to be fair with all the species. We're one of 25 million species. So I think each species has a right to a healthy population, not an extinction level. So how would I live? So I would take a slice of the biosphere that's fair, and I wouldn't be accelerating extinction rates. And then intergenerational equity is like fair, like the natives say, 1,000 generations. Or there's a Bruce Cockburn song, "Live with the power of 1,000 generations." So can 1,000 generations ahead still live like I live without me depleting from the next generation? Those interhuman, interspecies, intergenerational equity. I want to see how to live it right now. And my book shows how to do that. That's radical simplicity. It gives you all the tools to be able to figure it out and do it in a fun way. And then my film took it into a visual to see how live and living color, how societies can live in a way that aren't depleting the earth and they're not hurting. They're not taking extra piece of the pie that they don't deserve to have.
So what's happening now for you, Jim, both in terms of the Saving Walden's World documentary or any other films or books that you're working on? Bring us up to date on what's happening.
Yeah. Right now, I'm really focused on getting the film out into the world because I spent 8 years making it. And then today's world in film, documentary film, distributors aren't going to take up my film and send it around the world. So I have to do that work. So I think we have about 10 screenings coming up right now. I've gotten into 18 film festivals and I've applied to 30 more. So I'm really going to spend the next 2 years getting the film out in the world. I got an offer to go onto public TV. So now I'm going to cut it down from a 90-minute to a 55-minute film. And so I'm looking to make partnerships and get it screening in communities across the nation. So if any of your listeners want to host a screening, you can look at my website at savingwaldensworld.org, and there'll be a page there to host a screening, and it'll show you how to just write a little form, and we'll put a screening in your community. And so I'm hoping to have hundreds of screenings and also to generate hundreds of partnerships.
Beautiful.
And so the partnerships is a lot of NGOs are out there working in the same field of women's rights, economic empowerment, sustainability, decolonizing, world peace. A lot of communities working for peace. So all those groups, if they want to be a sponsor of a film, and when it shows on public TV, they could be even an underwriter. This film brought to you by. So I'm looking for small partnerships and larger ones, but with organizations that have the same mission. So my film might be a tool for them to use with, say, their membership. They could show the members can watch the film on a virtual screening, and I can come on and do a Q&A with them virtually. And it could be for free, or they could charge, and then the community, that NGO might give me a donation. That's what I'm hoping. I need to raise about, $50,000 to keep this. I have 2 or 3 people hired right now helping me with the distribution. Yeah, so that's what I'm gonna be, a distribution animal. Just trying to get it in the world.
And I would say for our listeners, how I met Jim was through one of these screenings that was in Boulder, Colorado, as part of the Global Health Film Festival. And it was just a very powerful, the film was beautiful and the discussion after was very powerful. So I would highly recommend it to any of our audience members to get Jim to come to your community and let's help get this documentary out in the world.
Thanks.
So, Jim, before we close, I'm wondering if you'd like to share any final words with our audience about how to, be living in a world that's free of war and where we all can live simply, that others may simply live.
Yeah, and for me, it's really about leading with what you love. That because no one can, tell you what to do with your life. You've got to make all those hard choices on all the little stuff, But for me, it's just like each day, I don't think I'll ever go to the grave thinking, oh, I wish I was a little less kind, And that those random acts of kindness, the more we amplify that, being kind to the people in our community and being kind and helpful to others, that's just like part of this partnership. And that's going to change people's minds, even if you have family members who are really on a different political spectrum. But when you go home to see them, or you go over their house and they feel your kindness and they know your politics, you may not have to talk to them about it that much. They probably know why you're doing what you're doing and what you're doing. They may think you're a little crazy, but when they feel your kindness, and and when you make choices of doing things you really love, like when I ride the bike, I usually will ride maybe 9 out of 10 trips are by the bike year round. I try to do that. But I used to, when I first quit, I would be like riding the bike angry, at all the car drivers, like, look at all those cars polluting the world. I'd have a scowl on my face. But when I ride the bike, actually, I love it because the wind's blowing through my hair. I feel this childish freedom. Whenever I'm on a bike, I feel like I'm not 9 or 10 again. Every time, and I'm 67 now, I just feel like great on the bike. So I lean in now to the things I love about my life, growing the vegetables or planting the seeds, or right today I'm boiling the sap from our maple trees to make maple syrup. That stuff is all just like fun. It's like child's play and enjoyable. So, and your kids are going to learn mostly by that, like I can't preach to my son how to live, but, if they see you having fun doing it, they may not even do it for 10 or 20 years. They're going to come back maybe when they're 30 and start paying attention to what you were doing when they were a kid.
Beautiful. Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of Resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. I'm Cherry Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to live.